Hi, I'm Arun George, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In today's episode, we're looking at where onion prices are headed after touching 100 rupees a kilo in some parts of India. We're also looking at the economic cost of what US President Donald Trump described as filthy air. But first, we're looking at the outcome of a meeting between the defense and foreign ministers of India and the United States. On Tuesday, Indian Defence Minister Rajnath Singh and Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar met with their US counterparts Mark Esper and Mike Pompeo respectively in Delhi. This meeting, known as the 2+2, was the third such meeting between officials of the two nations. The highlight of this meeting was the signing of the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement or BECA between the defense forces of the two nations. But the two nations also agreed to cooperate in Afghanistan, reaffirmed their commitment towards an open, reliable and secure internet, agreed to cooperate on health research, jointly tackle the narcotics trade, rejuvenate trade, and enhance their ongoing cooperation in multilateral fora like the United States. There was also criticism for China from the US officials and a push for Pakistan to do more against terrorism. But what do the outcomes of this meeting mean for India? We're now speaking with Shubhajit Roy, the Indian Express's associate editor who covers foreign affairs, and started by asking him why the signing of BECA is significant.
BECA, which is basically called the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement, it is one of the 3 or 4 foundational agreements which US considers extremely crucial for closer military-to-military cooperation. Foundational agreements are those which lay the foundation or basis for closer military cooperation, where both can trust each other, both can operate on each other's platforms, and talk to each other based on framework of mutual trust, and strategically they can talk to each other without the bureaucracies or without the barriers.
BECA helps India get high-quality geospatial intelligence from American agencies, which Shubhajit says could help in its border standoff with China that has now gone on for nearly 6 months. Shubhajit also has a better real-world example of what BECA is like.
It's somewhat like when you have a better GPS for your Uber. So just as your radio cab or the GPS in your smartphone helps you zero in on the path to your destination and helps you reach it quickly and efficiently, BECA will provide Indian military systems with a high quality GPS so that missiles can target the adversary much more precisely and much more accurately.
And BECA is now the third such foundational defense agreement signed between the two nations in the last 4 years. Shubhajit explains what the other deals achieved.
The Logistics and Exchange and Memorandum of Agreement, which is the LEMOA as it's called, it is extremely useful, especially Navy to Navy cooperation, where it's like taking your car to get it repaired when you're far away from your home and you take it to a friend's garage or a workshop. So if an Indian naval warship is visiting, say, the American naval base or an American naval base in some other part of Indo-Pacific region, so there Indian ships can be refurbished, renovated, repaired, or refueling can happen without any trouble, without any problem. Now, what happens is this requires certain bit of trust, because what happens is when you open up your car in a friend's workshop, in a friend's garage, then he or she can see the technology that you have, has access to the technology that you have. He has a better understanding, so that you can only open up to a friend of yours. And that's what LEMOA does, that Indian warships can be seen and accessed by the American warships. The same thing can happen with the American warships also. When they come in on Indian shores and when they open up, you get to see, and this cooperation can only happen on the basis of this mutual trust. The third agreement, which was signed a couple of years ago, is the COMCASA agreement, which is the Communications Compatibility and Security Agreement. Now, that is actually like a WhatsApp or a Telegram between the two militaries, where the two militaries can communicate through encrypted communication platform and equipment and systems. So these are highly sophisticated encrypted platforms which Indian and the American armies and militaries they can exchange on information on without being breached.
Shubhajit says that these three deals have immense practical benefit because it indicates that the two nations' militaries trust each other and can even work together, which he says is significant presently.
Especially when you have an adversary like a rising China, which is whose belligerence we are seeing along the LSE as well as in the wider Indo-Pacific region. So therefore, these agreements sort of deepen India's strategic cooperation with the US.
The US officials were hardly diplomatic when it came to speaking about China. Here's what US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had to say.
I'm glad to say that the United States and India are taking steps to strengthen our cooperation against all manner of threats, and not just those posed by the Chinese Communist Party.
This was much on the lines of US Defense Secretary Mark Esper, who spoke of China's destabilizing activities. Given the attempts by India to return to a status quo with China along the border, don't these kind of statements raise the stakes in this region?
So this is a very strong statement of solidarity and standing with the Indian side. In contrast, Indian ministers, that is Jaishankar and Rajnath Singh both, who were present with Pompeo and Esper, did not name China, but just spoke about respecting and upholding the territorial integrity and sovereignty of all states. It's an obvious reference to Beijing's belligerence along the LSE. So, in that kind of a big picture, it obviously raises the temperature vis-a-vis China, and predictably, China has responded to these statements. The Chinese embassy came up with a long statement where it said that Pompeo and other senior officials have repeated all lies, attacked and made allegations against China. It also criticized the Indo Pacific strategy proposed by the US, which is aimed at stirring up confrontation. So it has sort of also not gone down well, predictably, with Beijing. So, in that sense, it does sort of raise the temperature, but I think it was meant to convey a signal to Beijing that India doesn't stand alone, and US as a partner, as a like-minded democracy, stands with New Delhi. And therefore, the two top cabinet rank ministers, their presence in Indian soil, and amid this pandemic, when most of the meetings are happening virtually, their physical presence was aimed at conveying this particular message. And signing of Beka was, I think, the icing on the cake.
Another benefit that India received due to the talks was an assurance from the US that its development of the Chabahar port in Iran will not be impacted by US sanctions on 18 major Iranian banks. But why does this port matter to India?
India has strategic interest in developing the Chabahar port, primarily because A, it can be used to access Afghanistan to supply materials and etc., other stuff, from food items to grains to road material, other things. But also strategically, it's very strategically located very close to the Gwadar port in Pakistan, which has been developed by China.
Shubhajit says that when the US decided to impose sanctions on Iranian banks, India got a sense that its interest in constructing the port would be collateral damage.
To assuage Indian concerns, to sort of take care of those concerns, the US sent a note to the Indian government on 12th of October, just a couple of weeks before the 2+2 meeting, to sort of smoothen the conversation at the 2+2 meeting in New Delhi, and told the Indians that, Chabahar port development will not be impacted by these sanctions, and India can go ahead with its development process under the waivers that have already been granted by the American administration.
The waiver was also significant given the upcoming US presidential elections, which could result in a change in regime that might not be as hard on Iran.
The Chabahar port development project would still be kind of safe from and be insulated from any changes in the administration in Washington, D.C.
So India walks away from the meeting with greater military integration with the US and even a concession on an important project in Iran just ahead of the US presidential election. But the upcoming US elections also prompts the question, what happens to these agreements if there's a change in government? Would that dilute these agreements and ties?
If you take four people, starting from Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump, and put them in a room, there are no four different persons than or characters than these four people. But if there's one thing that all of them agree on is their relationship with India and a stronger relationship with India. And that I think is something to be kept in mind. The US really sees India as a strategic partner, as a rising power, and as a leading regional power. So, if you look at it from that context, Joe Biden, even if he comes to power and if there is a change in presidency from Trump to Joe Biden, because Joe Biden has served as a vice president in the Obama administration, I strongly feel that there won't be change in the substantive nature of the relationship. There could be change in some emphasis on how to deal with China. But the fact that, say, for example, China is a threat, that has a bipartisan sort of a consensus in Washington. Overall, the relationship towards India from US perspective has to become stronger. And this particular joint statement of the 2+2 is extremely ambitious, and it actually takes it to the next level. Short of an alliance, it is actually a much, much deeper and much greater strategic partnership where the militaries are being integrated, and we have not seen such kind of a framework which lays the basis for an integration better than before.
Before we get to the next segment, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say that they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there's perhaps no other place that does this better than the Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of the newspaper, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log into indianexpress.com/explained and access their coverage 24/7. Explained by the Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. Recently, 4 men in Pune stole at least 49 bags of onions, each containing around 60 kilos of onions. The total worth of this haul, 2.35 lakh rupees. After arresting the 4 men, the Pune police said that they've seen this before. And with onion prices touching 100 rupees a kilo in some parts of India, they're expecting to see much more of this in the coming days. Parthasarathi Biswas, who covers agriculture for the Indian Express, had predicted the rise of onion prices a few months back when the government imposed a ban on their export. He also said the price rise would prompt the government to import onions, and that's also come true. But with the import of onions and other measures taken by the government, can we expect a fall in prices?
Yes, obviously there is going to be a price decrease because these are market forces, and markets, as I always say, is moved by sentiments. Anything, a single statement by the government or the policymaker can make the market unstable. That's why what I see is that for some days there is going to be some relaxation in onion prices. Already onion prices in Pune and Mumbai, which had touched around 100 rupees, have corrected themselves to around 80 to 70 rupees a kg at retail prices. I feel that there will be slight correction to around say 60 or 50 rupees a kg range, and then again there would be a price rise. I feel after November, I guess that after December, when we would really understand the extent of the crop damage to the Kharif crop in Maharashtra, then only the prices would again rise. And this price rise would continue for a fairly long time. Despite imports, despite export ban, despite stock limit restriction, that price rise will continue for quite some time.
Partha says that the bulk of imported onions, likely from Egypt, will go to markets in South India where they will most probably be used in the hotel and fast food industry. So onion prices will stay high for some time to come. The government has also tried to limit prices by imposing stock limits, which is the amount of onions that traders can store. This in turn has prompted protests by traders. Partha explains why such stock limits fundamentally don't work.
If you are a trader, you would have the sense of the market. It's like a sixth sense you develop after trading in the commodity for years together, and in many cases, generations together. So at this moment, the traders have sensed there is going to be a bull run in the market.
Partha says that the rains damaged the harvest of onions this season, and additionally, there's a huge shortage of onion seeds. If farmers don't get enough good quality seeds, there will be a shortage of onions in the first half of 2021 as well.
In case of stock market, if you see the stock rallying, then only you will hold on to it in hope of more price, and then we will sell it off or offload it when the prices are you think are good. So at this moment, traders were buying up.
Partha says that the government has imposed a stock limit of 25 tons per wholesale trader and 2 tons for retail traders. The only problem with this amount, he says, is that it's like peanuts for big traders.
They are used to buying a huge amount. For example, Lasalgaon's market on an average sees arrival of around 16 to 17,000 quintals, that is 1,600 to 1,700 tons of onion. Now 25 tons is like nothing for them. So what they have done is they have stopped buying for onions. They are saying that this amount, that is the 25 tons that has been given, we already have more than that. So in case we buy more, then the action will be taken against us. So it's best we stop buying. And then also the forward linkages. For example, the traders in Lasalgaon, they deal with markets in Delhi, they deal with markets in Kolkata, they deal with markets in Northeast. So there are wholesale and retail traders there also. So in those traders also have stocked up on their onion in fear of price rise, in anticipation of good demand. And now they also have more than 25 tons. So they are saying until the time we are able to offload this stock, we are not going to buy anything new.
The government's measure has resulted in markets being shut in protest. And Partha says that if traders continue to boycott the markets, that's not good news either.
The government does not have, I repeat, the government does not have the framework, neither does it have the linkages, which would allow them to transport onions, say, from Maharashtra to Delhi or Maharashtra to Kolkata or Maharashtra to other places. Now, as a measure, yes, this will work, but in the long time, it disrupts the market.
Another group that's been unhappy with the government limiting how much traders can hold are farmers. In Uttar Pradesh, potato farmers recently opposed similar stock limits as the staples price continued to rise. Partha explains why.
First, obviously, they cannot then offload it to the traders. And secondly, there is a negative impact on prices. When the government comes up with such consumer-centric interventions, it is the farmer who has to bear the brunt.
Partha says that there are no government interventions when the prices are at rock bottom, and only come when farmers think that they can make profits.
That is the reason that is stock limits and all these interventions prompt protest from farmers, because they see as a direct hit to their income. And also the consumer, there is a time lag. The consumer has to wait for some time before this passes on to them.
A better option, Partha says, might be for government agencies to buy up onions and then sell it through its outlets. The bigger problem, he says, is that no government has ever invested in this value chain. So then what are the possible long-term solutions to keeping onion prices in control?
Long-term solution to this problem can be two-pronged. First is that the consuming states should start growing and storing onion, or instead of growing, they could start storing onion. States like West Bengal, states like Bihar, states like Uttar Pradesh, they should try growing onions. Or their marketing federation should be asked to buy onion at the start or the mid-season when prices are economical, and that they should store it at their kanda chawls, at their storage structures in their state. In case of a supply shock, there can be onions stored in the state godowns, which could be offloaded. And secondly, if there are farmers in those parts of town, in those parts of the country where the right climatic condition is there, right soil condition is there, if they start growing onion, there would be enough onion for them to last for some time. But obviously, this is not going to happen soon.
If every state starts growing onions, then that raises the risk of oversupply. And Partha says that India needs to aim to achieve a golden mean.
At the end of the day, we have to have a golden mid so that the onion grower in Nashik does not suffer and the onion consumer in Delhi or in Lucknow does not complain of high prices.
Look at China, how filthy it is. Look at Russia. Look at India. It's filthy.
US President Donald Trump's comment on the quality of India's air prompted much analysis on whether India's air actually fit the description of being filthy or not. But put aside the debates on how filthy India's air is, and there's also a question about how much this is costing Indians and effectively the country's growth. The Indian Express's Udit Misra, who writes on finance and economics for the Explain section, decided to look at the economic costs that we face due to pollution, and we're now speaking with him.
See, there are massive economic costs, and there is considerable amount of research now on how poor air or poor air quality or air pollution affects all of us. I was just reading some of the studies. And one study, for example, showed that 1% is in the particulate matter increases the child mortality by half a percentage point. Now, look at any country, child mortality takes decades to be brought down and massive amount of government intervention. So there are various ways in which poor air or air pollution, both inside and outside our houses, affects us. If you look at India's case, the overall air pollution in India's case is the second biggest risk factor in terms of number of deaths. And this was data related to 2017. The only thing that perhaps kills more Indians was high blood pressure, but air pollution per se is likely responsible for killing more people than smoking or even high blood sugar.
Udit says that this impact on health then translates into economic losses that are driven by deaths and ill health. People don't live as long as they should because of the bad air they may be breathing.
Apart from that, there are issues with productivity. So we do fall ill far more often, and that leads to greater loss in terms of productivity. So various calculations have been made. These are not straightforward calculations, but like one of the estimates that World Bank did for India in 2006 was that roughly the economic losses due to falling ill or long-term illnesses were pegged to around 7% of India's annual GDP. Now, if you look at that 7% in India's current scenario, it comes to a number of something like 12 lakh crores. And just to put it in perspective, 12 lakh crores, Indian government's total budget last year was around 27 lakh crores. So 12 lakh crores is roughly 50% of India's budget, half of all the money that the government spends. So it's too big to even be compared to one scheme or one sectoral allocation. It's a huge amount of loss. And it is equally important for listeners to understand that if we do spend money in terms of or towards tackling these problems, then most estimates suggest that every $1 spent in this direction typically gives you savings or returns of $9 in terms of what you save on public health care or treatment or gains in terms of productivity. So the economic aspects, though less understood, are very, very significant.
Basically, bad air causes economic losses that reverse any gains that may have been made in health indicators, and as a result, economic productivity. But then 2020 is an unusual year. Economic activity has contracted this year so far by almost a quarter. In a previous episode, we discussed how even a regulatory body is struggling to balance allowing economic activity and keeping air clean. For example, one of the steps taken when the air quality deteriorates in Delhi is to stop construction activity. But construction employs many and has been shut for nearly 6 months this year due to lockdowns and restrictions. So does that then mean we're stuck with bad air this year because of the need to boost economic activity?
There's paucity of India specific data as such, but most other countries where we have such studies, long-term studies over 10 years or so, say in Korea or in China also, the evidence suggests that typically in the metropolitan areas, this follows a inverted U curve. Basically, the pollution rises as economic growth increases up to a certain point, and then it starts to come down. The pollution level starts to come down. Typically, it stands to reason that as you grow faster or have more industrial activity, the pollution levels will rise. Why it falls is perhaps likely at higher levels because people have greater wherewithal and governments have greater ability to actually spend money towards mitigating such pollution or polluting elements. So in any case, you can understand that most of Europe or US has higher levels of industrial production than, say, a country like India. But they are not as polluting, and that is primarily because they have better regulation and better processes and more money to mitigate that level of pollution. Whereas in India, both at the individual level of you and me and at the government level, there would be maybe not as much motivation because we do not maybe understand the level of threat, and also a lack of willingness to pay for it, both again individually and as governments, to pay for mitigating those polluting causes.
India may be stuck with bad air as it attempts to grow out of a downturn. As Udit says, India would need to grow enough to start spending more on factors that could reduce air pollution. But is there anything that can be done till that happens? And if so, what are the challenges in implementing them?
Frankly, there's lots that has to be done in India. And if we look at not just air pollution, but also unsafe water or broader sanitation, then there's lots to be done, because pick any metric, and if you compare India with anywhere, either in the neighborhood or with countries of comparable size or population density, India comes off rather poorly, and there are various reasons for it. One of the reasons is lack of information and understanding about how pollution affects people's life. And this lack of understanding is across the board amongst people and in the industry and the government. And that is why not enough has been done.
Udit says it's complicated because your spending to ensure certain health indicators like child mortality or nutrition are good. But when the air or water quality is bad, it effectively negates the spending on improving health indicators. Basically, the money you're spending on boosting health indicators is not achieving as much as it could. And Udit says there's just not enough data on how much this is effectively costing us.
Basically, you need to come to a point where the society as a whole and individuals and governments have enough money and willingness to actually invest in taking action on this front. And perhaps at India's level of per capita income, overall GDP, that point has not yet been reached. Although there is evidence to suggest that countries which have lower per capita income or have actually done better on many of these issues, or even those which have the same level of per capita income have done more than India. But I think that again requires this becoming a political issue, and it's sort of a process which cannot happen overnight. It is only over time that people will possibly understand the impact or the massive adverse impacts that both air and water pollution tend to have on their life.
You were listening to The Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Arun George, and as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explained page. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.